afternoon. I would good afternoon. Welcome to the Museum of the Albemarle for our monthly History for Lunch. It's hard to believe that we are already in the month of June, but I guess we're all going to get ready to enjoy our summer starting this month. If you are here with us today, we ask that you please mute your cell phones. And then if you will hold your questions until the end of the program, we will have time for questions after we're finished with our lecture today. But before we introduce our guest speaker today, we would like to remind everyone that we will have History for Lunch on June 18th at noon. Well, Mr. Charlet was supposed to be our guest speaker today, but we have flip-flopped out a little bit. So he will be our guest speaker on June the 18th at noon for his newest book, Shipwreck Rescues of the Outer Banks, Sensational Wrecks and Heroic Rescues by the United States Life-Saving Service. But today, we are delighted that at the last minute, Miss Aida Havel of Havel Research Associates, who greatly agreed to help us out in filling our slot today. But she will discuss Herbert Bamber, his camera, and his extraordinary life service to the Ligh-House Establishment as he traveled America documenting lighthouses in the late 19th century. So if you will please welcome Mrs. Havel to the podium.
Thank you so much, Lori, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Before I begin this presentation, you might like to know how I came about to do research on Herbert Bamber, and the answer is that I and my husband, John Havel, down there with the camera, have been researching the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse for about 15 plus years. And we actually moved from Raleigh to Hatteras Island to be closer to the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, which I call the other woman in our marriage. And at some point, the question came to us, well, who took the earliest known photo of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse? And so that is how we started to research Herbert Bamber, who took the first known photograph of the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. And subsequently, after much research, we wrote an article about Herbert, and this presentation is based on the article that we wrote. The research that we did on Herbert Bamber came from a number of different sources, Ancestry.com, and I'm very proud of this one because when we started doing the research, all anybody knew was that Herbert Bamber traveled around the country in the early 1890s taking pictures of lighthouses. But nobody knew anything else about it. We didn't have a picture of Herbert Bamber. We knew nothing about his background, his history, how he got assigned to do this task. We only know that he took pictures. We found the first known photograph of him on Ancestry.com. It was his passport photo. And from that, we went on. We found cyanotypes and purchased them on eBay. We did personal research and got to know his great niece, Betty Buell Baldwin, who was enormously helpful. He grew up in Highland Township in Michigan, and they had a historical society, and they had a bunch of his journals, and they knew him from a different standpoint. They didn't know him as a photographer of lighthouses. They knew him as a kid who'd grown up there and who kept journals and who was kind of smart. We also got some information from Kenrick A. Claflin and Sons, which is a website online that specializes in nautical antiques, and they were very helpful. We went to the U.S. Coast Guard Historian's Office in Washington, D.C., and the U.S. National Archives. So when you decide to do a deep dive on someone, you really do a deep dive, and the information comes together from a lot of sources. I want to start by showing you two of the pictures that he took so that we can understand what a remarkable job he did. These are pictures of Currituck Beach Light Station, if you're familiar with it, or just one picture, actually, on the left-hand side. You can see Currituck Beach if you're familiar with the property there. It doesn't look like this now because there's so many trees around, but this is how it looked in 1893. And on the right, you see a detail of the same photo, and you can see the stairs and the keeper and his family on the right-hand side and the assistant keepers on the left-hand side. And the detail is remarkable. It's clean, clear, crisp, and just a beautiful photograph. And this is the way all of Herbert Bamber's photos are. So he was really a remarkable photographer, even though that was not his trade. I did mention that he went all over the country photographing lighthouses from 1892 and 1895. This slide is in this presentation 3 times because I wanted to come back to it to show where he was in various places. You can see the dot right here. This is where he started. He started in Isle of Shoals Lighthouse in New Hampshire. That was the first one at the beginning of his trip. He went up to Maine, down to the Gulf Coast, down to Florida, up the East Coast. Then he went around to the Great Lakes area. And then he went all the way to California and up the West Coast. And he finally ended up right over here in Willapa Bay, Washington State. So, early life and family. Herbert was born in Highland Township, Michigan in 1858. He was the eldest of 4 children. He had 2 brothers and a sister. And his father, Joseph, who had come over from England, so Herbert was a first-generation American. His father was a farmer who raised merino sheep. And here we've got an envelope from his father. I think the return address says, if not called for in 10 days, return to J.S. Bamber, Joseph Bamber, thoroughbred American merino sheep. I just love that envelope. We got that on eBay. And on the right-hand side of this slide, you see the family homestead. It was called Noah's Ark, or sometimes just the Ark. And this is a family picture taken of the Ark, and you can see on the left-hand side a young boy. I don't know, it's not Herbert, I'm not sure who it is, but a young boy with his arms around 2 of the merino sheep. And the 2 people in the middle, these are Herbert's parents, Joseph and Sarah Bamber. Herbert, until the 8th grade, attended a 1-room schoolhouse, as kids in that year did. Remember, he was born in 1858, just a mile from his house. He began keeping a journal in 1875 when he was 16 years old. And this is the exact schoolhouse that he attended school in. This is they still have it there, and it's been preserved. When he outgrew that school, he went to high school in the nearby town. But in December of 1877, his youngest brother, Sherman, died of liver failure. So he died at age 12. And I think that was Herbert's first loss in his family. And according to his journals, it hit him pretty deeply. In 1876, that was the 100th anniversary of the country. And that fall, he received an invitation to visit the big Centennial International Exhibition in Philadelphia, something like a World's Fair, I think. And he filled 2 journals with all the things he saw there. And you can imagine to a kid who's about, I don't know, 16, 17 years old, it must have just been a wonderful, exciting thing to see all of the inventions and things that were going on in Philadelphia at that Centennial exhibition. The picture on the right is an undated picture of Herbert. I don't know exactly when it was taken, but obviously he was a young man in that picture. 2 years after the Centennial exhibition, at the age of 19, he goes to the Agricultural College of the state of Michigan, the first agricultural college in the United States. Of course, Michigan was a very farm rural state. Now it's Michigan State University. Go Spartans. 3 years in, he gets very, very sick, and he has an attack of ague. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, with malaria, fever, chills, sweating. He did recover, but he wrote about it quite extensively in his journals. During his last term at Agricultural College of the state of Michigan, he wrote in his journal that this term, I am taking constitutional law and civil engineering, which is the first mention of engineering, which was actually his life's profession, in his journal. He graduates in August 1881 with a Bachelor of Science degree. And then later he would go to the University of Michigan. Who are they? They're not the Spartans. They're the Wolverines, go Wolverines there. But after he graduates, he owes his first job to one of his college professors, who gets a letter from somebody who says, I need somebody to help me survey railroads. So Herbert goes out to Utah and starts surveying railroads. And the picture here is not of Herbert, but it is a picture of the time that shows a group of four men surveying. And I think this is representative of what Herbert would have been doing as he surveyed railroads out there. He was making $75 a month, and this was his first real job as an engineer and as a surveyor. He completed that job at the age of 23. He returned back to Michigan to do some studies in engineering. And then his other brother went to the school that Herbert had previously been to, the agricultural school in Lansing, and he fell ill and died of typhoid fever. This is a picture of his brother Albert. This is not Herbert, this is Albert. But I love the picture because he just has a very fine, delicate face. It's a beautiful portrait of a young man who unfortunately did not really make it very much into adulthood. And it's just a reminder of how hard illness and medical conditions could be at that time. So Herbert has lost now, in his early 20s, he's lost two brothers, and all he has left is his sister, Mary. And throughout his life, he and Mary were very, very close, to the point that Mary named her only son Herbert after her brother. Once again, while Herbert is back in school, I guess getting what we would call a master's degree, he receives a letter, someone receives a letter asking for an assistant engineer, and Herbert is recommended. So he goes to work for Major Jared A. Smith, who was in charge of various government work in Indiana. We don't have a picture of Jared Smith, but he played a pivotal role in Herbert Bamber's life. He helped him with this first job. He got him another job later, and then he got him a third job after that. But the first job with Major Smith was surveying the Wabash River. He goes from camp to camp on a 60-mile stretch of the river, doing surveys for the U.S. government in the fall of 1883. And then in that winter and spring, he goes to Indianapolis and actually draws what he has measured and surveyed. There's two parts to surveying. You have to take the measurements, and then you have to draw the drawings. And he did that. And then Jared Smith was had to go to Washington to take over for someone at the Lighthouse board. And so Herbert Bamber accepted a position building a lock on the Monongahela River, excavating rubble, laying stones, and building dams. And the reason why all of this was necessary was because the rivers had gotten clogged during the Civil War. People had armies and whatnot had just dumped rubble and mess into the rivers, and they needed to be cleared so that they could be navigable for transport and commerce. So he starts to build the lock, and then when Major Smith has to leave to go to Washington, he becomes inspector at a dam there on one of the rivers. And then he receives another letter from Major Smith. And Major Smith says, I need you to go to Mosquito Inlet Lighthouse down in Florida. It's now Ponce Inlet Lighthouse. And basically the letter says, I need you to finish the building of this lighthouse. The guy that had been building the lighthouse, what was his name, honey? Orville Babcock had drowned in a tragic accident not far from the lighthouse at all. And the lighthouse was only 4 feet high. And so Major Smith said, you got to come and you got to finish building this lighthouse. He knew Herbert's abilities as an engineer on the river and as a surveyor. So Herbert starts as the superintendent of construction in November 1885. Here on the screen, you can see on the left-hand side, there's a picture of the lighthouse right after it was built with the scaffolding still on it. And then you see on the right side what it looks like today, although that's a rather old black and white picture. Here is an actual picture of the Mosquito Inlet Lighthouse or light tower as it was being constructed. You can see it's more than 4 feet. So this is definitely the work of Herbert Bamber. And then you can see up at the top, as far as they've gotten with it, you can see a scaffolding system there with people standing on the scaffold. And on the right-hand side, you see a drawing that Herbert did saying that he designed this. It's a sketch showing the working platform used in the construction of the light tower at Mosquito Inlet, designed by Herbert Bamber. And what's interesting about this is how it worked. In his design, bricks were left out every 10 feet up and every 10 feet around, and they would put a platform in so that the workers could stand on the platform and lay bricks. And then when they got as high as they could reach over their heads, they then put the platform, they moved the platform up and did it all over again. And when they got to the top, they did everything in reverse and so that they could come down, and they filled in the holes with bricks so that the holes that they had left when they removed the platform and moved up, they filled in with bricks as they were coming down. While he was there working on this and designing this platform, he also studied the cement that was available, because the U.S. Lighthouse Board used to put out a report every single year, an annual report. And in 1887, there were 2 appendices to the report written by Herbert Bamber. The first one was report upon the test made of the cements used in the construction of the Mosquito Inlet Lighthouse, Florida. So he did some sort of nerdy studies on cement and made a report about that. And then he did a report upon the working platform that he had designed that they used. I have here his transmittal letter where he says, I'm enclosing a brief description of the outside working platform. And he did a fold-out drawing. Here's the drawing. And this practice and this method of building a tower became standard practice for future brick masonry tower construction. So it's quite an invention for Herbert Bamber. When he leaves Mosquito Inlet, he goes back to Baltimore, which is the headquarters of the Ligh-House Establishment for the entire country. And he receives the final appointment that he will have for many, many years, which is superintendent of construction for the 4th Lighthouse District, headquartered in Philadelphia. So I guess he was successful at Mosquito Inlet. They liked what he had constructed there, and they wanted him to be the construction supervisor for all of the lighthouses in the 4th District. Beginning in November 1887, he earned $150 a month. So for the next 4 or 5 years, 1888 to 1882, our research didn't show a whole lot except that he asked for a lot of expense reimbursement. And so my guess is that he was pretty busy traveling from lighthouse to lighthouse and racking up expenses and needing reimbursement, as we often do. In the spring of 1892, he was assigned the task for which he is now known, which is to photograph many, but not all, of the lighthouses in America. And the project was known as a survey of lighthouse reservations. The job was twofold. He had to survey, measure, and map the exact boundaries of each lighthouse reservation, which, of course, being trained as a surveyor and engineer, he could do. And then he had to create a lasting photographic image of each lighthouse. It was a perfect match of the man with the job, right? So he took on this job, and you've got to think about what it must have been like traveling to lighthouses in the early 1890s. We didn't have roads, or if we did, they weren't the kind of roads we have now. Lighthouses were in the most inaccessible places. They were on the coast. They needed to be way out there so that sailors could see them. They were often on crags, on points. Sometimes they were on islands. Really very, very difficult to get to. And then Herbert had to carry his camera, the chemicals, the paper, the surveying equipment, and his personal belongings. It was really quite an extraordinary journey to have to carry all that stuff, set up at each lighthouse, take the measurements, take the pictures, and then do it all over again and record everything and send it back to Baltimore, which he did. Because he was not a photographer, he had to order photographic equipment. And my husband and I are very fortunate that we have these basically carbon copies of his order to Williams, Brown, and Earl, mathematical, optical, microscopical, photographic instruments and supplies. And I love what they have at the very top up here. They've got, oops, I'm sorry. Okay. At the very top up here, they've got this cable address autograph. It's almost like, your email address today. They had the cable address, and this is the list of supplies that they were quoting to Herbert. Over here it says, lighthouse engineers, gentlemen, we beg to quote you as follows on material listed. And so they were quoting the prices for all the equipment that Herbert needed. And I believe that the check marks are his check marks that he made in pencil on his own hand in the left-hand side. And perhaps some of the other is some of his addition as well. We got this, by the way. We found that we were fortunate enough to purchase this on eBay. There's another list here of the field equipment and the developing outfit. And on the list of field equipment, we've got here, I hope I'm circling it here. Is it down here? Amateur Guide to Photography. And there's another book, Photography Applied to Surveying, Lieutenant Henry A. Reed. So he was just taking a guidebook with him, and a beginner's guide to photography in the 1890s. Plus all of the equipment. I just find this fascinating. So a brief segue into photography in the 1890s. On the right-hand side is a camera similar to the kind that he would have used in this journey. And at that time, there were two different ways of making photographs. There were albumin photos, or as my husband says, albumin photos. This is a process that was invented in 1850. And you would coat a piece of paper with a layer of egg white, the albumin, and then put silver nitrate on it to bind some liquid chemicals to the paper. And then you pressed it onto the glass negative and make the picture. It produced very glossy, warm, and sharp images, but it was complicated and time consuming because you had to have the albumin and the nitrate and the chemicals, and it was quite the process as I understand it. Cyanotypes were a lot easier to make, and they were invented a little bit earlier. There was specific paper that was already kind of coated with the chemicals, and then that was pressed onto the glass negative and then exposed to sunlight. And that produced crisp, matte, not glossy, but matte images, and they were bluish toned, which gave rise to the name cyanotypes. And what Herbert Bamber did when he went around taking all these photographs was he made two sets of prints. He made one that were albumin photos, the ones that were very glossy and sharp and crisp. And then he made a second set for himself to keep for himself of cyanotypes. And I have often wondered why he did that. Was it just because he was an engineer and he wanted to back stuff up, or did he just have an eye to history maybe and might know that we might find these one day and that they would be very insightful into the life he lived and what the lighthouses looked like back then? I don't know. I don't think he was required to keep a second copy of cyanotypes of the pictures he took, but he did, and we are much better for it. So the first picture is taken on July 14th, 1892 at Isle of Shoals Light, New Hampshire. And here it is. Again, beautiful picture, beautifully composed, light and dark, clouds. You can see the water, just a lovely, lovely picture. The original is in the National Archives. And again, I threw this in here. I wanted to remind you all that he started in New Hampshire, went up to Maine, down to the Gulf Coast, and around. So this is quite the journey again. He continued the journey down to Florida, and he spent the winter of 1892 to 1893 in Florida. We have snowbirds now, and we have snowbirds then. He was no dummy. He spent the winter in Florida, and then following the winter in Florida, he went up to Morris Island, South Carolina, where he stayed for a month. I don't know exactly why he stayed there. Typically, he would stay at a light station for 3 or 4 days. Then he would pack up and go to the next. And an important note about that, he couldn't just go when he was done. He had to wait to hear from the Lighthouse Board in Baltimore that, yes, we've received your pictures and you can move to the next assignment. So he definitely was on their timetable and on their schedule, and he worked for them. But for whatever reason, he was in Morris Island for a month, from February 20th to March 22nd of 1893, and he had time to take a photo. And this one is dated Herbert Bamber, 1893. So this is the way he would have looked when he took the pictures of the Outer Banks lighthouses. This picture would have been taken about 3 months before he came to North Carolina and photographed the lighthouses here. And this is the North Carolina part of the journey. He went to Oak Island in early May of 1893. Old Baldy on Bald Head Island, which at that point was known as Smith Island, May 4th, 1893. And I've got here, do any of you know the name Kevin Duffus? Does that ring a bell? Okay. He is a wonderful historian. He has researched the Fresnel lens in Cape Hatteras. He's done a lot on Blackbeard, and he wrote a beautiful book called The Story of Cape Fear and Bald Head Island. And in this book, he writes a little bit about Herbert Bamber, and I just want to read this to you. Uh, see what it is. On May 4th, 1893, a skiff from Oak Island tied up at the landing on Lighthouse Creek and dropped off a dashingly dressed gentleman wearing a felt traveler hat with cocked left brim, a single-breasted lounge coat, a matching waistcoat, and a black silk cravat. He was handsome, with a sincere but studious gaze, a stylishly trimmed beard, and a fine straight nose. Under his close supervision, out of the boat and onto the dock was carefully unloaded what seemed to be an inordinate amount of baggage and a tall wooden tripod, making for the appearance of a long visit. There was probably no one at the dock to greet him and the assistant who was accompanying him, but the visitor did not need help finding his destination on the island. He had been looking at it for the past hour, the Bald Head Lighthouse. The keeper's barefooted children heralded the stranger's arrival. As he approached their house, Sonny Dosher stepped outside and introduced himself. The visitor shook Dosher's hand and informed him that he was Herbert Bamber, engineer for the 4th District U.S. Lighthouse Establishment, and that he was on special duty from Philadelphia for the purpose of surveying and photographing the nation's lighthouse stations. He and his assistant expected to spend no more than a few days on the island to accomplish their assignment. Since the previous fall, they had photographed lighthouses along the Gulf Coast from Biloxi to Key West, 5 lighthouses on the South Carolina coast, and the Oak Island range lights. So that paints the picture just a little of how he got to Oak Island. Or Bald Head Island and Old Baldy, sorry. So he then goes to Cape Lookout, traveling up the North Carolina coast, then to Ocracoke, and finally he reaches Hatteras, my husband's and my personal favorite, on May 30th, 1893. These are his original cyanotypes of the Cape Hatteras Light Station. On the left-hand side is the principal keeper's quarters, and on the right-hand side is the double keeper's quarters. We have these cyanotypes in our possession. They are down here on the stage. You're welcome to come up and look at them after this presentation. Again, my husband and I were very fortunate to come into possession of these through eBay, and these are Herbert's original personal cyanotypes of the keeper's quarters at Cape Hatteras Light Station, May 30th, 1893. And then here we go. The earliest known photograph of Cape Hatteras Light Station, May 30th, 1893. Beautiful, majestic tower against the sky. There's water at the bottom. Everything is reflected in the water. You can see both of the keeper's quarters. You can see the fence. There are few animals, I think, in this picture. But this is the first known photograph of Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. And, you know, that's interesting because the light was originally lit on December 17th, 1870. So that's 23 years without a single photograph of the tallest brick lighthouse in America, the most iconic, the most recognized. Of course, nobody thought of it that way back then, but still, it was an astonishing piece of architecture, a beautiful Victorian architecture, wrought iron, and it was a very important lighthouse because of the graveyard of the Atlantic right off the coast and how many ships had been wrecked there. And yet, to our knowledge, no other picture survives for 23 years of this iconic lighthouse. Here is a detail of the survey that Herbert Bamber took while he was at the lighthouse. And you can see where the lighthouse is. Let's see. The lighthouse is right here. And then you can see how far it is from the ocean. Did I do the right thing? Is it? sorry, I think the lighthouse is here, right? There's the lighthouse, and you can see how far it is from the ocean. And of course, that changed considerably over the last century. But it's a beautiful, crisp, clean drawing in Herbert's hand. From Hatteras, he moved on up to Body and then to Currituck Beach Light Station. This is the picture I showed you originally. Again, cyanotype. We had this cyanotype in our possession. We donated it to the Outer Banks Lighthouse Society, and they later sold it to the Outer Banks conservationists who own and preserve this lighthouse. So again, I just wanted to show his journey so you could keep up with it. He's only not even really halfway through it by the time he does the North Carolina and Virginia lights. He crisscrosses more of the country, and at the very end, in late 1894, he goes to Willapa Bay Light Station in Washington State. I bet none of you have ever heard of Willapa Bay. I had not heard of it before we did this research. But this is his last photograph. And again, it's just so striking to me, the composition of it. It's black and white. You can see lines, shadows. You've got the keeper right there, and you can see his shadow against the house there, the lighthouse. Just a beautifully composed photograph. It looks almost contemporary. You wouldn't think that this was made in 1894, I don't think. So the end of his journey. Up here at the top is the first photograph we found of him. This was his passport photo. And of course, passport photos are always horrible, and that one's not the best. And then the bottom picture is a picture of him from his family. I don't know exactly when it was taken, but on the back of this photo, it said something like beard from Europe, because from what we can tell from his family records, he was always a clean-shaven man, but I think he grew a beard in Europe, and it didn't look bad at all. In fact, I like it very much. But that was taken sometime when he was in retirement. He did retire in the early 20s, sometime, 1920s. He went back to Michigan and went to the Bamber farm, which his father had sold to him in 1896. When he did apply for the passport, he said that he planned to travel to Cuba, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Bermuda, Panama, and Costa Rica. But I also know that he went to Europe because he wrote beard from Europe on the back of his picture. So I think he must have traveled quite widely after he retired, as many people do. He said on his passport application that he wanted to leave as soon as practicable. He wished to state that he is a resident of Michigan and is in Philadelphia en route to the South. He will remain in Philadelphia awaiting the granting of his passport and will appreciate any consideration the department may give to the early disposition of his application. Apparently, it took a while to get a passport even back then. He lists his occupation as civil engineer, retired. In 1928, he sold the family farm and moved a mile east. And in the 1930 census, which is the last record of a census that we have of him, he was 71 years old, and it said no occupation. On the left hand here is a picture of the Ark, Noah's Ark, the same house, in 1925-26. So it hadn't changed very much. And on the right-hand side is a family reunion photo. I can tell you who a few of the people in this picture are. This woman is Herbert's mother, I believe, and this is his father. This is not his sister. This is Herbert. I believe his sister is, yeah, I think his sister is this lady right here. And that's her son, Herbert. Herbert's namesake. In 1937, his death was reported as follows. Stricken with apoplexy, Herbert Bamber expired very unexpectedly Tuesday afternoon at his home in West Highland. Having some business to transact at Pontiac, he had made arrangements to be driven over by his neighbor, Mrs. Perry Hewitt, who stopped for him at the appointed time of 1:30 p.m. He came out on the porch, put up a little card telling the probable time of return, as he was in the habit of doing when leaving home, and saying he would be ready presently, went inside. Mrs. Hewitt waited for nearly half an hour for him to emerge before deciding to investigate, and found his lifeless body just inside the door, apparently having expired just after re-entering the house. He was in his 79th year and unmarried. But wait, there's more. In the next edition, or a couple of weeks later, of the same paper, the Milford Times, the following story appeared. 3 passenger coaches, a freight car, and a mail car derailed last Friday morning. The passenger coaches plunged down an embankment, coming to rest 25 feet from the tracks. A passenger on the ill-fated train was Herbert Buell, who was on his way to attend the funeral of his uncle, Herbert Bamber, at West Highland. He suffered injuries to leg, ear, and hand, but was able to keep going and continued to Highland by automobile. Herbert Buell, named for Herbert Bamber, and the only son of Herbert's sole surviving sister, Mary Elizabeth, must certainly have contemplated his own mortality while honoring his uncle. And here is a picture of Herbert's tombstone in the West Highland, Michigan cemetery. Very simple, does not really talk about any of his accomplishments, but there he lies. And here we have some personal memories of Herbert. I think you can read them. I'm not going to share them all or read them all to you. But basically, they say that he was a rather solitary man who loved his family, always gave gifts, came to family reunions. The one that I like the best is at the bottom. Herbert was a 6-foot, well-built, slender, sedate, genuine English gentleman. He had keen, steely gray eyes, a sharp profile, and distinguished, intelligent bearing. He was always smoothly shaven and moved with deliberate body movements. His sense of humor was decidedly English, but always kindly and helpful. Herbert was always neat and properly dressed, with a professional and austere approach to problems. So, what is Herbert Bamber's legacy? Well, we've got this enormous photographic archive, which has helped lighthouse historians enormously know about the early years of many, many lighthouses. Many of the Albemarle originals are in the National Archives in Washington. Many of the cyanotypes are in private collections or are at the various lighthouses that he photographed. He was also an engineering innovator. Remember, he built that scaffolding system that became standard practice in building towers and lighthouses. And his historical documentation has also been helpful. The surveys and the photographs just really help us understand what life was like, and in the late 19th century, and what it must have been like living on these lighthouse reservations. I have down here a catalog of very bad black and white copies of all of his photographs, and many of them have people in them. The keepers' families wanted to be photographed. It was a very rare occurrence, obviously, to have someone there with a camera, and they wanted to be included in the pictures, and I don't think the Ligh-House establishment objected. There's one picture down there with a dog and a child and a mother. I just think it's a lovely shot. But they do give us a little bit of a window into what life was like back then. So for years, we haven't known anything about Herbert Bamber other than that he traveled around taking these pictures. But we now know that he was a farmer, a teacher, a surveyor, a civil engineer, a resourceful problem solver, a dedicated public servant, a world traveler, a businessman, and a kind and devoted relative to his siblings, nephews, nieces, and cousins. My final comment is our picture of him may not be as clear as his exceptional lighthouse prints, but we now know significantly more of the story of a rural Michigan farm boy who left us an impressive legacy of lighthouses and their keepers at the end of the 19th century. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
You're a terrific speaker. I enjoy hearing his story and his life so much. And it's not unusual, I think, to have a photographer that doesn't have a lot of pictures of themselves. But is there a book that you're compiling? Or?
Well, this is the question is there a book about Bamber? This is an ongoing topic of discussion between me and my husband. I would love to write a book on Bamber. He thinks that we would sell about 5 copies. So, and we have so much other lighthouse research to do that we have not done it. But in preparation for this talk, I was going back through all of the stuff that we have and all of the treasure trove of stuff. We have so much more than I could put in this talk today. There really is enough stuff to write a book about, and I do think that it would be worthy, but there is nothing. We have done the original research, and until we did this research, nobody knew anything about it. Yes.
You mentioned that you wrote an article. Where was that?
The original article that we published was first published in the Outer Banks Lighthouse Society's magazine, which is called Lighthouse News. It was later published in the Keeper's Log, which is the magazine for the U.S. Lighthouse Society. And then it was published in the magazine for Ponce Inlet, Mosquito Inlet Lighthouse. So it's been published in lighthouse journals, which don't have a very wide circulation, but that's where it's been published. All right. Please come up and take a look at this stuff, and thank you again.